Well, good morning once again. Glad to have you all in attendance with us. I don't know why. I just need to go back to saying y'all.
Y'all.
It's you taking that spiritual southernness with you.
Yeah, my
We're
pilgrimage.
going to have an issue.
My pilgrimage back down to Texas has reinvigorated something in me. We are assembled once again for our Bible class. We're in John chapter 7. We're going to be moving into, I have 21 on that, but is that right?
No, you got to 9, then you read a little bit like 10 and 11, but we still have to go through 10 and 11.
Okay, all right, so if you would fix that really quick.
So 10.
Yeah, 10. I know what it was. I went ahead and was looking at some material ahead of time. So we may not even get to that 24 today. So Jamie, whatever you wrote down for today, you might have to save it for next week.
Or the next week after.
Yeah, because I don't know if we'll get to 24 today. But I'll just go ahead and say it. We're not going to get to 24 today. But we have Jesus fixing to come back to Jerusalem, and just for sake of review, why is it that he's fixing to come back to Jerusalem?
The feast.
All right, which feast? Who said it? Huh?
Feast of Tabernacles.
Okay, I couldn't hear it. Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths, or also Feast of Ingathering, Feast of Harvest. And that you have this 8 days where everybody's coming back to Jerusalem, and what are they doing in the midst of these 8 days at this feast time?
Resting.
Okay, resting, but resting how?
In their tents.
Okay, everybody's living in tents. That hence the name, Feast of Tabernacles. And why does God have them living in tents for 8 days? As we said, all these physical things that God is having them do and that God is having us do has spiritual significance behind it. So what's the spiritual lesson? What is they're supposed to remember?
The wanderings in the desert,
Okay.
the reliance on God.
All right. So how it was that in the Old Testament, God bringing them out of Egypt, the great Exodus, and then how it was that God made them live in tents in their wandering in the wilderness, and how it was that God was providing for them through that wandering, providing manna every day, and then quail on top of that. Their clothes never tore, got old, their shoes never wore out, anything like that. And all of that is to, once again, impress upon their minds, you need to rely on God. And especially with them fixing to go into the land of Canaan, and everything is going to be taken care for them. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. You do not go into this land and all of a sudden start forgetting about God and how He's the one that brought you up to this point. All right, so then we have that transpiring, and then with all of this, with all these events that are taking place, and then we have the discussion about Jesus with Jesus and His brethren, and how they try to goad Him into doing something that's not really a situation that He has no right to be doing it. But as we're saying, we're learning about what makes people do the things that they do. His brethren saying the things that they're saying to Him, the accusations that they're making, and the accusations are nowhere close to being true. You know, why are you doing these things out here in the wilderness? Why don't you go to Jerusalem and show yourself openly? He's already been to Jerusalem. He's already worked miracles in and out of the temple. And just because He's over here in this wilderness performing these miracles doesn't mean that He's trying to do it in secret and that He's trying to hide something. He's doing it before multitudes of people. But, as we said, we're finding the actions that come from attitudes and thoughts, jealousy, envy, indignation amongst His own brethren, His own kinsmen, and how that they were not even willing to follow Him and to believe Him. So all of that's transpiring, to where we have Jesus saying to them in verse 6, Jesus said unto them, in response to what they're trying to say to him, Jesus said unto them, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. Jesus knows the time for his death and his full-out conflict with the Jewish leaders is not at the present time. But their time and the recognition of, hey, you could go at any moment. So you need to stop having these harsh feelings and these ill feelings that you're having towards me and recognize the truth and just follow it. Be obedient to it before your time runs out. Then Jesus gives further response as to why he's now doing the things that he's doing in the manner in which he's doing it. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth. He's explaining to them why he's not going back into Jerusalem. It's not because he's afraid or that he's trying to do anything underhanded. It's the simple fact that these people hate me. So we have this growing conflict between Christ and the Jewish leaders, and we have Jesus becoming an irritation to the people. Now, these things are important points because this gives us a proper view of what is going to happen as we are involved in evangelism and trying to teach the truth. And it's backwards to how most people think that your reputation ought to be when you're out here trying to teach people. Oh, well, if you're out here trying to teach people and you're doing it correctly, then you shouldn't have people irritated with you. You shouldn't have people upset with you. You shouldn't have people trying to keep you out of coming to where the worship assembly is. But what's the reality?
They're going to be that way.
If you are doing your job correctly, and you are really teaching what the Bible teaches, and you're giving people what they need to hear, people are going to be upset with you.
Well, in that vein, and as what was happening at this point, as they're journeying to their Feast of Tabernacles and or got done with it, or getting towards it. Their attitude, this is their attitude right before this joyous feast,
right,
where they're thanking God and they're going through the motions, just like as in the application of what you're saying right now. Everyone is going through the motions. They need to be shook up. Jesus is shaking his brothers up and saying, even you don't get a pass. You're my family. You're in sin. Your deeds are evil. And that's along the lines of what you're saying, is that we, as those who are God's spokesmen, are needing to do, and that's what's going to happen.
Right. And it's, you look at the prophets in the Old Testament. Jesus even uses them as an illustration in Matthew chapter 23, moving over to 24. You are the same as your fathers that persecuted the prophets of old. It's always going to be the case that when you have people that are living sinful lives, and then you come along and you try to point that out to them, they're not going to appreciate it if they do not have first an appreciation for truth. And that's going to end up coming into play later on in this chapter, and moving into also chapter 8, to where Jesus is going to say to this crowd, you're going to seek me, but you're not going to be able to find me. And he states in this chapter the reason why that is the case is because they do not know God. Now just think about that for a moment. Just think about you trying to say that to somebody that you know, that's close to you, not a member of the Lord's church, but they're over here in some denominational organization, and you just end up flat out saying to them, it's like, you don't know God. What kind of response is that going to bring?
Once you go to Jerusalem.
Exactly. Who are you? But that's exactly what Jesus is going to say to this crowd. And these are Israelites. In the midst, like Jamie pointed out, in the midst of this feast where we're spending 8 days supposed to be praising and worshiping God for what He's provided for us, then you're going to stand in front of us and say to us, we don't know God? That's exactly right. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But even as Jesus is pointing that out to these Jewish people, think about that. So we made application to our denominational friends, but what about our own brethren? How many of them are going to be assembled today, but they don't know the first thing about God?
80%.
More than 80%.
85.
87.6. And it's just, then it goes back into that mentality of, well, who are you to say that of me? Who are you to judge me? It's the same thing Jesus is doing. Let me look at your fruit. Let me look at your life. And let's really see if you're comprehending what it is to know God. And most people, most of our brethren in congregations where they're assembling, it's like with these Jews. It's going through the motions. It's tradition. It's just surface level. And then when you start trying to get into spiritual points, like Jesus is going to do in this chapter, brethren just sit back and shake their heads like, what is he even talking about? And it's just, okay, you're what Jesus said to Nicodemus, you're supposed to be a teacher. You're supposed to be a master in Israel, and you don't understand these things?
We're lazy and make excuses like we don't have any elders.
Yes, exactly. So Jesus is handling all of this far and wide. Nobody's exempt from this. His closest of kin, to these strangers that are in the wilderness, to these spiritual leaders in Jerusalem. You hate me because I testify of it that the works thereof are evil. Again, Jesus is not pulling any punches. He's not using euphemisms. He is calling it for what it is. What you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is evil. It's wicked. It's sinful. And that's going to come into play in this chapter later on by the fact that the multitude was amazed by what he was saying and that he spoke boldly in front of them. And that word boldly, it simply means he spoke plainly, clear, so that nobody is going to miss the message. All right? So then verse 8. He says, go you up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto the feast, for my time is not yet full come. So he's further establishing, I know what I'm doing. When he had said these words unto them, he abode still in Galilee. He knows what his mission is. And his mission is to fulfill this divine purpose of going to the cross to die for the sins of the world, but to resurrect.
Does Jesus know specifically when he's going to die?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, like it's just known, no, I have 5 days, 4 hours, and 29 seconds left? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a crazy concept to try to comprehend. And that, just what would you do with your time if you knew not only the time in which you're going to die, but the manner, how you're going to die?
Go skydiving, rock mountain.
Right. Go, what was it, 3.7 seconds?
On a bull Fu Manchu.
How it is that changes our whole perspective on life. So why is it that Jesus is living the way that he is? Because he knows when and how. All right? We don't know when and how, but that still should change the perspective of our lives and how we spend our life. It could go at any moment. So I need to live in striving to do the will of God as much as I can.
I was just going to say, it's like somebody who knows that they have cancer now.
Right.
They like all of a sudden, I guess I better turn my life over to
Right.
God and
Yeah.
go follow. It's like, where was that 2 days ago?
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of giving God your time when you had strength and energy, and now you want to give him your last few days. Yeah, it's don't understand why I do understand, because they think they're going to live forever. Death is never going to come. And then it just shows up and it's like, oh, well, I better straighten up. Should have been doing that the whole entire time. So he stays in Galilee. But verse 10, when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? Now, when we consider these events as they're being described to us by John in this fashion, when we think about how it is that Jesus is having to go to Jerusalem at this time during a feast week, and he's having to do it in secret, what do you think about that?
Well, it's hypocrisy, because we're all rejoicing, we're all going up and thanking God, and here we are, but he's afraid that they're going to, he's not afraid, he's doing it in secret because he knows he has to hide so that they don't come and kill him before his time has come.
Right.
So he has to take precautions, and it just shows the hypocrisy of their attitude towards him, which they shouldn't have at all.
Right. Here are these religious leaders, and we're at this time of gathering and rejoicing, and then you're wanting to try to turn somebody away during this event. You have no right to do that. You shouldn't be doing this. All right? Anything else? What other just points of application and thinking about what they're doing, what Jesus is having to do?
I'm just kind of, I don't know if this goes, but just thinking about what Mom just said. When we're thinking about having to go talk to a brother, if someone's in sin or there could be some conflict, we shouldn't have this feeling like this because it's wrong. Like for our application,
Yeah.
when we have to go talk to brother, sister, anyone, whoever, and we get this thing, it shouldn't be this thing. It should just be, we should just be able to come together and talk. But when one of the people that you have to talk to's heart is wrong, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
That's all I was correlating.
Okay, and that's a good one. That's a good point, because we'll dive into that one a little bit more. Anything else?
Just shows that you need to be prudent with your time and what you do. Like, look ahead and not just go out there, I am Jesus, and then they all attack you. It's like, no, he has to strategically do things. And
Okay, so that's
It's okay to keep secret.
okay. So that's a key point that I was wanting to try to focus in on.
ha, losers. No.
You can see later that he does come out later, because at the beginning they're searching for him, but then later when they're not searching for him, then he comes out and does this thing when they're not ready for him.
Yeah.
Is what you see later on.
Okay. So this whole situation of Jesus going into this place in secret. It's interesting that denominational folk and even some of our own brethren would get irritated and have issues with me and the kind of work that I did in Virginia going into denominations under concealment. And our brethren would even try to use the word of deception and trying to go in to confront these religious leaders and be able to teach and to preach. But where do you think I got that from?
Jesus, what would Jesus do?
It's the very same situation here. This is the opportune time to go in and to teach these people a lesson. And Jesus is not going to allow these religious leaders, so-called religious leaders, to keep him from going in to a place that he has every right to be in, though they don't want him there, to go and try to help people. And that's the whole point. He is using that exact same method. He is going into a place and he's not wanting to be seen, and he's going to disrupt their routine. So even with that kind of situation where, they would falsely accuse us of doing these things, that we would come in and disrupt their service, so on and so forth, which we never did that. But Jesus is disrupting things here. He is rocking the boat in what they're doing. There's not one bit of difference in what Jesus does here to even what our pioneer brethren would do in this country. One of the ways that Alexander Campbell was able to turn so many Baptist churches into churches of Christ was he would go and he would assemble in their Bible studies and in their worship assemblies, and he would ask questions. He would debate right there in their Bible classes. And the people would be able to see firsthand their leaders not able to answer him, and people would leave those assemblies. They would stop being Baptists and they would become Christians. And that's the very thing you're going to have happen here in this chapter. Oh, the religious leaders, they're talking all big and bad when Jesus is not there, but Jesus shows up and he starts teaching openly. And what do the people start talking about amongst themselves?
How does he know he's unlearned?
Okay, that's there, but that's after something else.
This is the guy that they're trying to kill, and they won't say anything.
There you go. Here's the one that they're trying to kill, and now he's teaching openly, and they don't say anything to him. Are they change and the people begin asking the question, are they starting to change their tune? Are they starting to believe? Why aren't they doing something? And the people start to change. The people start to shift. Once they see that hand-to-hand combat that's taking place, and nobody's able to give him an answer. And they begin to be swayed. So for our brethren to say, well, that's the kind of stuff that won't work, that is the kind of stuff that will work. And the reason why we're not seeing the kind of change that we want to see is because brethren aren't utilizing these kind of methods.
So essentially, Jesus and by extension us are that, what is that thing called that you put into wood, the spike? And it just splits the log in half, you hit it with the mallet, it's a big one.
Oh, the wedge or the...
Yes, the wedge.
Yeah.
So he's essentially doing that because it forces those people to get out of their hypnotism or their rote of behavior, whatever, and actually start thinking, okay, this is my leader, and they're failing. They have no answer to either Jesus or in our application to us, and then that allows free thinking to start to grow.
Right. And we're going to find in just a moment that there's another element at play as to why this is needed. And there's an attitude and a mindset that has come over the people that has chained them to a large degree as to why they haven't done this before. Why haven't they already started to make these kind of changes? Well, there's something at play, and Jesus was needing to come in so as to overrun that. But we'll say that for when we get there. So just as we're thinking about these ideas, as we mentioned, Jesus has every right to be there, but the reality remains the leaders did not want him there. And that's the kind of stuff that brethren would say about us in Virginia. Well, you shouldn't have gone there because they didn't want you there. Oh, well, I guess Jesus should have stayed away from the temple then, because they didn't want him there either. That's nonsense. And what that is that's an attitude of fear. Well, we don't want to be viewed a certain way. We don't want to be thought of as being, these disruptors. If you're not going to be a disruptor, then you're a compromiser. And you're just going to let things go. It's like right now, look, everything that's going on in politics. Why was it that our government was just able to pass a bill to where they sent another $64 billion over to Ukraine, Israel, and to Gaza, our enemies? Because our spineless representatives that know what to do didn't do anything.
Well, I would say they're blackmailed, but that's another story.
Well, no, I understand, yeah.
Just to point out to you, which I'm sure you already know, but Ryan Zinke was one of those who signed that, so.
I thought he voted no.
No, he did not.
Well, then why is he advertising that he voted no?
Not on this one. It's on Gateway Pundit this morning.
Good night. It's just, they talk a good game, and that's all they want to do. They want to get out there and talk. Well, here's what they did, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. It's like, what'd you do to stand against it? But ultimately, the question needs to be, what are we going to do to stand against it? See, everybody wants to point the finger and kick the can down the road as to, well, why didn't you stand up and do something? Why haven't we stood up and done something? But you see, nobody wants to think that way because, oh, well, now you're just being radical. Now you're just being an extremist. And all these different labels. Listen, I know what right is and I know what wrong is. And I'm going to do my best to stand up for what's right. Even if that means having people wanting to kick me out of society. So what we're finding with this, Jesus is experiencing the very thing that he's already warned them about. You start standing up for what God says is right, how are the people going to treat you?
As if it's wrong.
As if it's wrong, and they're going to start ostracizing you. So he is taking all of that on before his apostles will. And he's showing them an example of a good leader. Listen, I'm not just sending you out here for you to experience this, and I'm not going to experience it. Jesus experienced it all first. And then he sent his followers out to do the same. What were you going to say, Jordan?
Just going back to your question, so when we're learning here, John 1, darkness hates the light.
Yep.
That's what this is.
Yep.
And if we're gonna follow him, we are now the lights here because Jesus is up there. We have a task to do.
Yep.
We're gonna be handed as well.
Yep. So he has to go up in secret. And then verse 11, the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? Now usually, in this kind of context where this is being referenced, this has connection to the Jewish leaders. But I would argue in this context that this is the entire crowd, to where they're asking, okay, where is he? The Jewish leaders are asking it because, okay, we're upset with this guy, and we're looking out for him, and we know that if he's going to come here, he's going to start teaching and preaching. We got to put a stop to that. You have them. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what makes you say it's the people also?
Because of like we're saying, we're tying all of this together from chapter 5 into chapter 6, and now moving into this, to where like you have the multitude that have experienced what Jesus has done. It's like, okay, here's this holy day. He claims to be the Son of God. Where is he? Why would God's Son miss this feast? And it's just, you have the crowd, and they're all expecting it. It's like, okay, he's going to be here. What's he going to do when he gets here? And that's actually going to be the verse for our sermon in breaking down and investigating all the different kinds of people that are going to be asking this question and the motivation as to why they're asking the question. What's on your mind?
Went down for 13.
Yeah? What does it say?
Okay, no man's spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. So I was expecting that to be the same Jews as the ones saying, where is he? Versus what verses with them? About the multitudes and the ones murmuring among the people, saying that he's a good man, and then others saying that no, he's deceiving them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was
Say it louder.
When reading verse 11, then the Jews sought him at the feast, saying, where is he? And then you skip to 13, howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. So the Jews are the ones that they were afraid of, and they were the ones that were wanting to harm him when they're saying, where is he?
But verse 12 says, and there was much murmuring among the people. So this is a multitude thing. This is a joint situation to where you've got, yeah, the leaders are a part of it, but you also have the common people, and they're murmuring amongst themselves, but they're not saying anything openly because they're afraid of the Jewish leaders. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's not them. I'm saying it's including them, but it's everybody. So it's the same situation back in Matthew chapter 2 at the news of his birth. And it says that Jerusalem was in an uproar because of this news. Well, now it's the same type of thing. Everybody's talking and everybody's trying to figure out what's about to happen here. So here are people that thought that they owned God's assembly. You have the religious leaders, and this goes to the point that Jordan made about, well, this is normally how it goes when you have to confront somebody that's in sin. And it shouldn't be that way. Well, that's true. But we also have an element in this that does not need to be there, to where you have an elite class inside of God's religion and they think they're running the show. And here are these people that thought they owned God's assembly and they would not allow people in or out. They have this idea of, well, no, this is our thing. This is our house, and you're not needing to be here. But Jesus is going to teach in John chapter 10, verse 9, he says of himself, I am the door. And by me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. So we have this situation, just as the parable that was laid out in Matthew, of a king that let out his vineyard to his servants. And the servants started thinking, this is our vineyard. He sends other servants to gather from the vineyard, and they persecute those servants. The king says, well, I'll send my son. They will reverence my son. And what did the servants actually say when they see the son coming?
Kill him?
Kill him in what?
They'll take the inheritance.
We will seize upon his inheritance. You see, we'll take this for our own. And there are people just like that today. Well, this is our church, and we're not going to allow you to come in here and teach what you're teaching.
Even if they have to put locks on the door.
Even if they have to put locks on the door. Change the locks. And for those that don't know, that's a reference to what my family did to me back in Virginia. Not just to me, there's other brethren also. Some of our brethren are just like this today. Now, I can understand keeping people out because of violent activity. You don't have to allow that kind of stuff to go on. But when it comes to somebody coming in that just simply has a different, let's say a different viewpoint than our own, or even let's say that they have false doctrine that we know of, are we the kind of people that we simply push people out and we don't allow them entrance in because, well, we don't like what you're saying about this, or we don't like this position that you have on this? Is that what we're supposed to do?
No.
All right. How you back that up? What are we supposed to do?
I was going to say, you're supposed to teach them Matthew 18 if you have fault with your brother.
Okay, if this is a brother, then go to them, or if it's something that everybody knows about, deal with it publicly. But then you also have passages like Titus chapter 1, verse 10 and 11.
Go there.
Yeah, sure you were. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision. Well, okay, let's just keep them out. Don't even let them come in. Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. There are times in which false doctrine must be opposed openly. Because the very thing we're about to see with the Jewish leaders, our own brethren are not learning from this. What is going to help these people be turned over to following Jesus is the fact of, well, why aren't our religious leaders answering this? Why aren't they answering him? And our own brethren have not learned from that example. you just simply push stuff to the side and don't answer it helps turn people over to the other side. But our brethren have this mentality of, well, no, we can't be hostile. We can't, be troublemakers, argumentative, this, that, and the other. We're just going to keep you out. What that does is breed curiosity. To where you have people, they're going to watch that, and they're going to see, well, you didn't answer that, so I'm going to look into it. Just kicking someone out does not prove your position or disprove theirs. But that's what a lot of our preachers are doing. Well, no, we're not even going to talk about that. And if you are going to keep pressing it, then we're just going to kick you out. So in studying this is making me look back on things that were going on in Virginia with the 80s, 70s stuff, and that was the very mentality, that was the very thing that was happening over that topic. When Holger and Steve Baisden showed up from Michigan down to the Martinsville church building to want to talk about and debate this 80s, 70s stuff, my dad was a coward when he threatened to call the police on them instead of answering their false doctrine. And because of that, because of his inability to act, that then allowed my little brother to get drug off in it. And then the response was to any of the other brethren that wanted to start looking into it, if you start diving into this, you're going to be withdrawn from. That's this very attitude right here. And it was showing itself back then, and I didn't know how to spot it.
Can we also take what you're talking about, your application, can we take it to Sandpoint also?
Sure.
They absolutely refused to look into anything, and they didn't want to hear any disruptive talk whatsoever, refused to think about it or anything, barely listen to you guys.
Yep. And even in that situation of, okay, they show up at the building and they're trying to put you on the spot and all those kind of things. I'm not saying he had to have a full-out debate right then and there. But it's this situation of, look, you're just coming in here and we're in the middle of stuff already. We're not going to do this now, but we'll set something up. But he didn't even do that. It was just a thing of, I'm not going to talk about it, I'm not going to study it with you. If you don't go, I'm going to call the police. Shouldn't have done that. Because that's the very thing the Jews are trying to do here, and it opened the door to something. And so we wonder why so many of our brethren are getting drug off into stuff that 50, 60 years they wouldn't have been drug off into. And it's because we do not have teachers or preachers or elders that will stand against things openly. Just about anybody today will tell you that one of the reasons why we still have the Church of Christ today and that it did not get swayed off into premillennialism was because men like Foy Wallace, and there was somebody else at the same time, that they were constantly writing about, debating with denominational preachers over the issue of premillennialism and an earthly reign of 1,000 years. And because they withstood that openly, it saved so many brethren from being swept off from it. But now we have these topics that are coming up amongst our brethren, and it's just like, well, that's not a salvation issue. That's a cop-out. That's an excuse, them making an excuse to not having to teach on things. Okay, well, if it's not a salvation issue, then I'll start digging into it. I mean, the very fact that we have so many of our brethren that are falling off into the whole regenerated earth theory, that this earth is not going to be completely destroyed, but it's going to be what is it? Not regenerated, that's not the word. But it's something. Yeah, that the new heavens and new earth is going to be here.
Reincarnated.
Well, it's not reincarnated, but it is, it's online with Jehovah's Witness doctrine. And you've got a whole host of our brethren that are falling off into that lane, and guess what different preachers and teachers are saying about it? Oh, that's not a salvation issue. We don't have the same kind of courage that's being pictured here that our brethren used to have, to where it's just like, nah, we're going to fight this. And that fight is not being had, and brethren are just taking off with it.
I had something, but I'm just going to let it go.
Okay. Well, if you want to bring it back up, you can bring it back up. This is a necessary thing. And this is what Jesus is doing. He's going into their feast, and he's going to call them out on the carpet for what they're doing in the middle of the feast. Here you are, supposed to be observing this feast, and yet you want to kill me. Oh, Jesus, you're just being a downer now. Couldn't you have done this at some other time? Couldn't you have done this after the feast? Yeah, could have. But it wouldn't have had the same kind of punch as to doing it now. You see, people try to play all these kind of games. And it's trying to get an emotional trigger of second guessing and doubting what it is that you're trying to do. No, this is what needs to be done. And if you want to get mad about it, you can get mad about it. But it doesn't change the facts of the situation. So then that leads us into the 12 and 13. So here's the attitude that you have, and then we're going to see the effect on the people. So any thoughts or questions before we move from this side of it, which we're not really moving from this side of it, we're just building on it.
To add on top of the Titus thing, I was going to say the best time to do it, to talk to people, is when they're coming in here interested, and instead of just kicking them out, it's like you're just letting them go and keep spreading that false doctrine. It's like right now is the time to take it in and pursue their false teachings and try to fix it now,
Right.
while you still got the chance.
Right.
Instead of letting them out there and spreading out the
Yep.
disease.
Yep. Yep, I agree. Anything else? All right, so here we're finding the atmosphere that's around Jerusalem. Now we're going to see what that ends up doing to the people. And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him. For some said, he's a good man. Others said, nay, but he deceiveth the people. Howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. Here is what is happening to the common people because these religious leaders are abusing their position. They're afraid. Now here's the people, and they're divided about Jesus. They have seen his actions. They've heard his teachings. Some are concluding, well, he's a good man. Others are seeing those very same things, and they're saying, oh, no. He's a deceiver. How can two groups both watch Jesus and then come away with two different views?
Different attitudes.
Different attitudes. The heart of the person and what they want to see is what they will see. The ones that are saying that he is a deceiver have no desire to follow him. And the rest of the people, here's the common people, and they're caught in the middle. Here they are afraid to say what they thought because of the opposition. And this group is still alive and well today. I'm talking about both groups. The opposition that's doing wrong and doing wickedly, and they have abused the people to such a degree that they're afraid to do anything. Here are the common people afraid to say what is on their mind, and if they do, they'll get in trouble with leadership. That is not how it's supposed to be. And especially in the Lord's church, but it's happening in the Lord's church. Brethren are afraid to bring up thoughts and things that they study simply because they might be of a different view or a different perspective from what is the norm, and they keep quiet about it because they do not want to get in trouble with the higher ups. But if there's a misunderstanding about something, people should not be afraid of asking a question so as to try to find an answer. Or to even question the position of leadership. Well, okay, I know you're wanting to go this direction, but have you considered this? Have you thought about doing this? Or, I know you're wanting to go this direction, but did you know that these people are involved in this?
I would tap on an experience that goes in line with this. I would also say, not is it that they're afraid, but I would bring up our verse in Hosea, which my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and in particular, two older ladies from the former group that we met with, when confronted with a member's sin that we were trying to correct, they said, you know what, we've talked about it, we're not going to say anything, we're just going to let this go because this is a family member. And these were lifelong members of the church who could not even implement the basic foundations of confronting somebody in their sin, even though he was an older man, and all these excuses.
Yep.
So they should have known better, and
Yeah.
they didn't. And we didn't hold them to account because we didn't know better.
But sometimes, and this is what we've discussed in the past, about having that good leadership. At this point, they're afraid to speak out, but Jesus is going to step in, and he's going to challenge these religious leaders, and he's going to show to the people they do not have the kind of power and control that you think that they have. And that starts to shift things. Sometimes all it takes is having the person that's willing to take the first step. Huh?
Bugs life.
Excuse me. A lot of times people know that there's something that's needing to be done. They just need somebody to look up to. And that's what Jesus offers. And when we think about this from the standpoint of us being Christians, God's people, His children, we're supposed to be students of this book. We're supposed to be students of the Word. And we're supposed to be able to think for ourselves. I mean, the whole point of Acts 17:11 is being willing and able to listen to anybody. and to hear what they're going to say. But then I'm going to run it through what the scriptures have to say to find out if it's true or not. But most of our brethren are just so used to being spoon-fed, going back to that tradition of things. We go in, we sit down, we listen, we go home. And to do any kind of thinking on your own or any kind of study on your own that ends up putting your views in difference to what the teacher is giving you, if the teacher does not have the right attitude and the right character traits, he's always going to see that as a challenge to his position. He's always going to see that as opposition. But that's not how it's supposed to be. And to where if I am involved in study and I have these thoughts that are in my head, I should be able to run ideas that I have up the flagpole and not have to be afraid of getting hung on that pole. But a lot of times that happens. You bring up some idea that, brethren just have not thought about and they have not considered, and it just seems like, well, it sounds like, it seems like you're going off the deep end here, and they'll be ready to mark you. Just over the simple fact that you're even willing to consider and talk about what it is that you're talking about. And I'm sure there are a lot of brethren that were like that. Earlier in our John discussion, John chapter 5, and we're talking about the healing of the pool at Bethsaida.
I was ready right then and there.
Still ready.
And that's just, you have it being described that these were the things that were happening at that time. That an angel would just periodically show up, trouble the water, and the first one to get in there would be healed. And then just being willing to sit back and contemplate and to think about that we still live in that kind of world. To where if God had the desire that some pool somewhere that people could start going to and be healed, how many of us would be super ready at just knee-jerk reaction? Nah, that's not real. Better pump the brakes. Because that stuff happened, and we're still living in that kind of world. But for people to hear me say that, and it's just, well, Mike has lost his mind. No, I've not lost my mind. I'm just not afraid to talk about that kind of stuff. But a lot of people are. And part of the reason why they're afraid of that kind of stuff is because of stuff like this. So this is an email that got sent from my dad to members at the congregation in Martinsville and in Danville when all those things first started happening. Them calling me a heretic, not explaining why, and people starting to ask questions about it. This is what the leadership started trying to do. And the email actually starts right here. So this is from my dad. Please remember Proverbs 26:20, where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. Let us all consider the wisdom above. Responding to the email sent to us by Carrie is not something to which you need to or ought to respond. Carrie is not someone to whom we owe an explanation at this time. He is someone concerned, and we should all pray for him and his family. But really hone in on this last section on the bottom. Please be reminded, if you do respond and you incorrectly use Scripture, you will be called upon to recognize this could be construed as divisive. that's utilizing fear of discipline as a weapon. You answer in a way that we don't like, we're going to view you as opposition. So guess what happened with the brethren there in Martinsville, Danville? Same thing that's happening with these Jews at this feast. They're afraid to say anything. It's not how it's supposed to be. Then you have the same kind of attitude being shown at Mount Zion by Gilbert Goff and the other men. Nobody needs to look into this. Nobody needs to investigate. And then the ones that do start investigating into it, we've all heard how they get treated. Because you're going against the leadership. Those brethren in Mount Zion, they want to slander me, and they want to slander the work that's here. They get called out on it, and they try to stop brethren from investigating. By the utilization of the same tactics that we're reading about in this chapter. You'll be viewed as divisive. You'll be viewed as a troublemaker. That's fine. Call me whatever you want to call me. It doesn't make it so. They instigate fear amongst the people of God from standing against what is evil. And that's even how it was at the Memphis School of Preaching. When I wanted to confront the teachers on a topic, my classmates would pull me to the side, and at one point, one of them showed me, I don't know if this video is still on YouTube or not, but they showed me a video of how the teachers dealt with a former student who opposed them openly at their lectureship back when they used to have an open forum, but they stopped having an open forum because of this former student. The question they was asking about using women as translators in the mission field. And they tried to show that to me so as to try to sway me from doing what it was that I was about to do. Well, Micah, if you do this, look at how they handled this guy. And I watched it and I told them, I said, they didn't answer his question. They ridiculed him. They ridiculed his grades. Keith Mosier was one of the worst ones in trying to dissuade the crowd from listening to him by trying to bring up this guy's Greek grades. Well, I was his Greek teacher and I saw his grades, and I can tell you he doesn't know the first argument out of Greek. That's not how you answer something. But you see, that's a challenge to leadership. Quote unquote leadership. See, brethren try to use this stuff all the time. They try to get you to feel a certain way about what it is that you're about to do. Here's how people are going to think about you. Here's what they're going to say about you. Here's how they're going to look at you. Doesn't matter. You can hate me all you want to. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And if you're in the right, you shouldn't be afraid of questioning. Truth is never afraid of investigation. And that's why we need to be careful. This is the kind of fear that will cause a person to be lost. The Bible is not calling us to have a complete removal of that emotion. That's not what it's calling for. What it's calling for is a removal of the level of fear that would keep us from acting. It's fine to be afraid. At one point, even Jesus was afraid. His apostles were afraid. That's not the issue. The issue is when your fear keeps you from doing what you know that you need to do. And that's where we need to pray, like the apostles prayed when Jesus was teaching them about forgiving the brother that trespasses against you 7 times 70. And Peter's response is, Lord, increase our faith. This is the area where we need to have that same kind of request. Increase our faith that I can do what I need to do, and that the world may hate me, but God is going to take care of me. And that's a hard place to get to. Because contrary to what many people think about me, I do care about what people think about me. I don't want anybody to be angry with me. I don't want anybody to despise me. But I'm settled in my mind that you're not going to be able to please everybody. And what's going to help us is in this recognition of, when I examine what I'm doing, am I doing the right thing? And if I'm doing the right thing, then let the chips fall where they will. And what happens, happens. And just being okay with that. But again, as we said with our studies, we're learning about why people are doing the things that they're doing. And we're making that same kind of application with the world today. So in just thinking about what was going on in Virginia, and even what's, to some degree, what's going on here, to where there is a fairly large group inside of this community that, with us being as young of a congregation as we are, they are already recognizing us as being different from the other churches in town, and they're already expressing their appreciation of us. But more than likely, they won't come to be a part of us. And the reason why is what we're studying here. Well, you've got other people in town, more powerful people in town, the Foursquares and New Life and whoever else. Well, they don't like what we're doing. And so they don't want to be at odds with them. And then they won't join themselves to us. We had all kinds of people all over Martinsville and Danville. Loved the stuff we were doing. But we never saw them at an assembly. It's this kind of stuff. Oh, they would talk about it amongst themselves. But they would not speak it out in open because of fear of what the rest of the community would say about them. This is a hard saying. Not in understanding, in application. Because nobody really wants to be the first one to throw yourself on the wire. To be the martyr. But sometimes that's what it takes.
I would just say that this is, how we've had this discussion about the character. This isn't just a religious thing, this is a people, this is a human
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
And we see it in grade school, you see it throughout society, you see it in the workplace. It's just people just content to not be moved out of their current situation. They want safety. And what they take as safety is just like, what's the quote that's coming to my mind? Those who are content to be slaves are, it's the freedom quote.
Yeah.
I think it was Ben Franklin. I
Yeah.
can't remember. I'm garbling it up. But it's essentially that one. If you're not willing to stand up, then you deserve that enslavement. And people don't recognize that. And for a long time, that was my problem. Oh, well, don't make waves. Don't do this. We can get along. Everybody has to be nice. But that's not what we're learning.
People will sacrifice freedom in search of security.
It's Thomas Jefferson. I can't remember.
And that's what's going on here. Well, if we play by the rules, we can still come to the feast, still do what we need to do, have this good time, so on and so forth. See, it's not a right. It's a privilege. And privilege can be given and also taken away. Not if you're willing to stand up for it. It's not a privilege, it's a right. God said, I'm supposed to be here. You don't get to tell me otherwise. But that's what happens with ego and putting the wrong people into power. They start putting themselves, it's the very thing that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians about, the son of perdition. He put himself into God's temple, sat on God's throne, behaved himself as though he were God. You can see that right here with the Jews. Oh no, we're the ones that decide who get to come and see God and who doesn't. I don't think God put you in that position. But that's what people end up doing. And people that don't stand up to it, just, they allow it to grow. To where it just consumes everything. So then we have verse 14, where we'll pick up next time, where Jesus finally goes up. About the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and he taught. He's not going to let them stop him. He's not worried about their feelings, how they're going to think about it, what it is that they want. He knows what his mission is. And when we know what our mission is, we'll be able to take on that same mentality. We're not going to be stopped. We're going to do what we know that we need to do, no matter who it is that starts rising up to hate us. The ones in power are going to hate you, but the ones that are being abused, they'll start coming to your aid. And that's the funny thing about the whole situation, isn't it? Usually the ones that are being abused outnumber the ones that are in control. We end up letting a few run over the many. So going back to A Bug's Life. The one that stands up motivates the others to stand up. But it's just being able to realize and to recognize, okay, you stand up, more than likely you're going to have a fight on your hands. We don't need to be afraid of a fight.
Steadfast, immovable. That we're always ready for a fight.
Always abounding in the work of the Lord. And we're at war with powers of darkness. But in order to see that, we've got to look beyond the material and the physical. And that's going to be a problem that the Jews are having. It's all about the material, physical, and forgetting about that spiritual aspect of it. So, ending on verse 13, any other thoughts, questions? Okay.